If it's Monday, recovery mission. With the president's COVID symptoms nearly gone, the White House hopes for an improving political prognosis as it turns its focus to the issues of crime, abortion, and the economy. Plus, the race to contain monkeypox. The White House says it's ramping up vaccine supply as the World Health Organization declares another global health emergency. What we still don't know about this fast-spreading disease infecting thousands worldwide. And later, making amends. Pope Francis delivers a long-awaited apology to thousands of Indigenous people for generations of abuse. We have that story live from Canada. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. With just over 100 days until the midterm elections, the president and his party right now are putting the focus on three of the biggest midterm issues for voters in America: the economy, abortion, and crime. On the economy, the White House is bracing for a week of headlines on inflation and interest rates as a potential recession looms large. Tomorrow, we will get new consumer confidence numbers, an economic indicator that has fallen for the last 2 consecutive months. On Wednesday, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell meets the press to discuss the agency's inflation-fighting strategy and its decision on interest rates, highly anticipated. On Thursday, we'll get second quarter GDP numbers, which are expected to show a second straight quarter of decline, a common indicator of a recession. And on Friday, we'll get a new round of inflation data. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen tried to downplay the prospects of a sustained downturn when she spoke with Chuck on Meet the Press yesterday. Take a look.
I do want to emphasize what a recession really means is a broad-based contraction in the economy. And even if that number is negative, we are not in a recession now. We've got a very strong labor market. When you're creating almost 400,000 jobs a month, that is not a recession.
And we're also following developments on the issue of abortion, one of the big issues Democrats hope will motivate their voters. Today in Indiana, the state's Republican supermajority is aiming to come to a consensus on an abortion ban. And Vice President Harris was in Indianapolis today to meet with Democrats and sound the alarm ahead of the November elections.
The United States Supreme Court, in the Dobbs decision, took a constitutional right that had been recognized from the people of America, the women of America. The government should not be telling an individual what to do, especially as it relates to one of the most intimate and personal decisions a woman could make.
And finally, President Biden is expected to deliver a video message to the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives as Republicans work to make crime a major issue in November. Now, the president, I'm told, is expected to tout his accomplishments with police and targeted politicians who say they are on the side of law enforcement but act otherwise, including former President Trump. This should be an interesting one, folks. We're going to be listening very closely to what he has to say today. I'm joined now by two of my NBC News colleagues, Mike Memoli, who joins me from the White House, and Shakir Brewster has the very latest on the abortion fight as Vice President Harris visits Indiana as that state considers an abortion ban. Mike, I have to start with you before we get into the issues. Let's start with President Biden's health, though. His doctor today saying that his symptoms are almost completely resolved. We know that the White House has been giving updates throughout the weekend. They're holding a briefing to update folks. What are you hearing?
Yeah, that's right, Kristen. We expect to hear more from the White House press secretary, Dr. Shah, in a few moments here. We just, though, heard from President Biden himself, who said that he is really feeling like he's making a good recovery and hopes to, in fact, be able to work back in person in the West Wing later this week. This is day 4, if you consider day 0 to have been last Thursday when the president was first diagnosed with COVID-19. And the White House had telegraphed that he would be tested once again after his 5th day. So that puts him on track potentially to do so on Wednesday if he tests negative. It has been a quick recovery, but it's worth noting, Kristen, that part of the course of the treatment the president's been receiving has been Paxlovid. We know that there have been cases of a rebound case of COVID-19. So this is something the White House will be monitoring very carefully and easing the president back into a full schedule.
And Mike, so often we have to soldier through live shots with background noise at the White House. In this case right now, it is heavy rain that we are hearing behind you as the skies open up here in Washington. Let me turn to something that you and I have been reporting on throughout this morning, which is that the president, as we have said, is going to be addressing the law enforcement organization. And we expect him to give a pretty fired up, feisty speech. It's going to be pre-recorded. But he's likely to take aim at the former president on the issue of law enforcement. Mike, what are you expecting to hear from President Biden on this?
Well, Kristen, I've actually arranged for this weather for this moment to help make the argument that there are both literal and figurative storm clouds over the White House at this moment. Yes, there's severe weather coming through at the moment, but also the White House dealing with two of the major issues that are expected to dominate the Republicans' midterm messaging this fall. That is the economy, and that is this question of law and order. Today, President Biden is going to be trying to really flip the script on Republicans to make the argument, as he has so often in the past few months, that he is not for defunding the police, but funding police, and reiterating what he was supposed to discuss last Thursday with that canceled trip to Pennsylvania, increased funding for law enforcement, but also to really turn the focus on President Trump, former President Trump, and also some of the other would-be potential rivals in 2024, because there's been a lot of rhetoric in the view of the White House in support of law enforcement from Republicans. But as we have seen so often in the course of the January 6th Select Committee, the idea of President Trump standing by while some of those frontline officers at the Capitol were under siege by, as Liz Cheney has put it, the president's own supporters is something they want to really flip the script on. As it relates to the economic messaging, it's notable that we just heard from the president, and he was speaking about what they expect to be a real accomplishment at a time when he's struggling to move his agenda forward. That is the CHIPS bill, the legislation that would try to revive the semiconductor industry here in the U.S. This at a time when we expect potential negative data on the economy coming later this week. Janet Yellen, among those White House officials, trying to make the argument that because we still can see strong job growth at the moment, it's not technically going to be, in their view, a recession. They're putting this on a rather obscure agency, the National Bureau of Economic Research, as the final arbiter of what is and is not a recession. But clearly the White House trying to get ahead of what is likely to be bad news. And there's the thunder right on cue.
Right on cue. Very nice analogy there, Mike. Nicely done, and way to push on despite those heavy showers behind you. Shaq, I want to turn to you. There are thunderclouds where you are right now, not in the literal sense, but in the figurative sense, over this issue of abortion. And that is what brings Vice President Harris to Indiana today. She's talking to Democratic lawmakers. As Republicans, as we talked about at the top, they have control in the state, and they're starting a special session to talk about a potential abortion ban. And the debate that they're having internally is really just how far to go with this ban. What is Vice President Harris's message today? And more broadly speaking, Shaq, are we going to see a lot more of her on this issue? This seems to be an area where she is comfortable. This is not the first time we've heard from her on it, certainly, and not the last.
Right, and it's not the first time that we've seen her meeting with state lawmakers just in the past couple of days. It was this weekend she was in Virginia talking to Democratic lawmakers there. Today she was in Indiana talking to Democratic lawmakers in a state, the first state to launch a special session after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in that Dobbs decision, removing the protections for abortion rights for women nationwide. What is being considered right now in this first day of the special session, and the reason why you have Vice President Harris there, is Indiana is right now considering a near total ban of all abortions in the state. Now, there are some exceptions in the law, or in the proposed law, in that bill that's being debated. Exceptions for rape and incest, for life of the mother, for fetal abnormalities, but this will definitely be, without a doubt, a rollback of rights that women have in that state. So you've seen very vocal and very visual protests at the State House today, both in and outside of the chamber. At one point, you can hear from the live stream some of the protesters as lawmakers were talking. And then it also led to that visit from Vice President Harris, who made clear with Democratic lawmakers that while she is limited in what she can do, what she and the president can do at a federal level, she said she's standing with those lawmakers who are standing in opposition to that ban on abortion in Indiana.
And Shaq, as you've been talking, we did get a little bit of breaking news from the White House. The president, who's giving that economic message that Mike was just talking about, just answered some questions about how he's feeling. He said he hopes to be back at work in person by the end of the week. So we'll have to see if that happens. Again, that comes as his vice president has been in Indiana with this message on abortion. Shaq, one more before I let you go. Obviously, abortion has been at center stage in Indiana for a range of issues, everything that you just laid out, and also this case involving a 10-year-old. Talk to us a little bit about that case and how it's resonating there right now.
Well, this was a case that caused national firestorm after President Biden mentioned it in a speech, expressed sympathy for this 10-year-old. It was met by conservatives with a lot of doubt and disbelief that it was a real story. And then that 27-year-old suspect was indicted. Well, today we actually saw him in court. He was arraigned. He pled not guilty to 2 counts of rape, felony rape of a child under the age of 13. We didn't hear from him, but we did see him via video link. He had handcuffs on. There was a Spanish translator there. It was a very quick hearing, Kristen, but it's the timing is pretty striking. The fact that you have this arraignment, you're seeing the suspect in court. This is a case that was in Ohio, but was tied and specifically mentioned by lawmakers in Indiana as they were considering the legislation and how to pull back and restrict some of the abortion rules and regulations there in Indiana. So you're seeing all of these different stories connected all at once in one day, Kristen.
Yeah, we certainly are. It is a case that has captured the attention of the nation. Shaq and Mike Memoli, thank you so much. And joining me now is Arizona Democratic Congressman Tom O'Halloran. He's a former police officer and a Democrat running in a frontline district this November. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. I know it's a busy Monday.
Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate being here and talking on these issues.
So let me talk to you because we are waiting for President Biden to give this speech on crime today. We expect that we're going to see that taped speech any moment now. You're a former police officer, and I wonder what you make of his strategy. We expect him to take aim at former President Trump and also tout his own record on policing. He passed that executive order back in May. Has the president done enough on the issue of policing?
Well, you know, I think it's moving in the right direction. I helped the administration develop some of those issues and working with police organizations across the country. I think the underlying issue here is, under the American Rescue Plan, there was enough flexibility put in there that today we have $10 billion that has gone through that program out to police departments across the nation. The president just has announced, or will be announcing, $32 billion over 5 years to go to retention of our officers, hiring of new officers, helping officers with their health care, mental health care, and helping the rest of society also develop processes to improve the quality of life for citizens in areas of poverty and help with the crime issue.
And yet, Congressman, as you know, executive orders only go so far. Are you disappointed by the fact that the president and the Congress writ large have not been able to get legislation passed as it relates to policing? And is it one of the issues that's hurting you as you head into your reelection battle? And I know you're facing an uphill battle.
Well, I know the messaging so far from the Republican side has been one of not funding police, and that just the opposite has really occurred over the last 2 years. The other message has been one of not getting things done for the police. And we have a number of bills before Congress right now. They're moving through the process as we speak, and they will go to addressing that ability to retain our officers, to pay them well, to make sure that they have the appropriate health care and benefits, and training. Yeah. And we don't want anything to stop the training process so that officers know exactly what how to work on de-escalation and other issues out there. And it has to be continual training. It just can't be training when they first come on the job and then moderate levels of training. Yeah. And we need to be partners with our police departments in order to fund these issues. And we have to continue.
Congressman, let me ask you about the issue that is looming over your bid for re-election and that, frankly, is looming over all Democrats and this president. That is the economy. And real questions about whether the economy is headed toward a recession. A number of economists believe that that's inevitable at this point. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, said over the weekend to Chuck that no matter what happens this week, no matter what the key economic indicators are, she doesn't think that we're in a recession. She's making the argument that, look, most economists take in a number of factors, including the labor market, which the White House argues is quite strong. So let me put the question to you. Do you agree with Janet Yellen? Do you think that a recession or do you think a recession is inevitable at this point?
Well, I think that the job market is strong. I agree with her on that. I think that the families of America are struggling.
But do you think that we're headed toward a recession, Congressman? Just the reality check there. Do you think we're headed toward a recession?
I think that there's tough economic times potentially ahead, but we're at that balancing point. Mm-hmm. Are we going there or are we not? And there's not enough information, I believe, that, in this strong job market that we're seeing. And there are other factors across this country and across the world that are having profound impacts, not least is the Ukraine war, the supply chain issues out of China. They're lowering economy also. The European community struggling with the energy issues, and as we are. Wars create these environments, and the Chinese have such a profound impact on American imports, and which means the supply chain for a multitude of issues, but it also means inflation if they can't get those products to us in a reasonable time.
Congressman, I want to ask you about the proxy war that is playing out in your state, in Arizona. We have seen this. Former President Trump, former Vice President Mike Pence on opposite ends of this battle for governor. What do you think it would mean for your state? Obviously, the candidate who Trump has endorsed, Kari Lake, is someone who has backed the president's false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. What would it mean if an election denier were to win the governorship in your state?
Well, obviously, when you have election deniers, that's going to, and they're in elected office all of a sudden, that will have an impact if they're going to try to continue down a path that, whether it's the Supreme Court of the United States, other federal courts, our state's Supreme Court, and across the land, over 60 courts in this land have said this was a free and fair election. And in the state of Arizona, every elected official, whether it's our governor or county chairs or county supervisors, you name them, they all backed up the election in Arizona. And and state after state after state.
Yeah.
So I don't know who wants to continue to push forward this idea and concept, but they have not found the proof to prove their point.
Congressman, very quickly, I know you're running in an uphill battle. What would need to happen in Washington in order for you to win in Arizona, in order for you to win this race? Is it possible?
Oh, definitely possible. I've won a Republican +3 district 3 times in a row. This is a Republican +6 or 7. I have polling that identifies clearly that I have a path to victory. I'm one of the most moderate members of Congress, and I work with people, not against people. And so I will continue down that path to find the ability of us to deal with the priorities of America for the American people and families.
All right. Congressman O'Halloran, thank you so much for joining us on this busy Monday. I know you're doing a lot of campaigning, so appreciate it. Coming up, Pence versus Trump, as we were just talking about, round 2. The former president and vice president prepare to deliver dueling speeches yet again, only this time in the nation's capital. Their competing visions for America and the Republican Party. That's next. Plus, going viral, more than 16,000 cases of monkeypox now identified in more than 70 countries, prompting a rare move from the World Health Organization. Details on the U.S. and global response ahead. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Former President Donald Trump will be returning to D.C. tomorrow for the first time since leaving office to deliver remarks at the America First Agenda Summit. Meanwhile, later today, his former Vice President Mike Pence will be speaking with the Heritage Foundation, also here in D.C., on the freedom agenda. But as leaders on both sides of the aisle try to nail down their midterm message, lawmakers are preparing to return home for the August recess and will undoubtedly face their voters as legislation on almost everything remains stalled right now in Congress. I'm joined now by my fantastic Monday panel, Leigh Caldwell, co-author of the Washington Post's Early 202, Faiz Shakir, advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, and Doug Heye, Republican strategist and former communications director for the RNC. Thanks to all of you for being here. Good to see you all. So I want to start with, before we talk about this proxy war between Trump and Pence, we are expecting we're going to get remarks from President Biden today. He's talking to a law enforcement organization, I should say, and he's going to take aim at Republicans and try to make the argument that a number of Republicans, including former President Donald Trump, profess to be law enforcement candidates, leaders, and yet do the opposite. He's going to use January 6th as an example. Doug, weigh in. Do you think this is smart strategy on the part of
politically? It's very smart strategy. Look, Democratic voter enthusiasm is at record lows. What motivates Democrats? Donald Trump. And if we look at everything that we've seen in the January 6 hearings, Republicans always talk about back the blue. And this is a series of hearings or presentations that show Republicans not always backing the blue. And so for Biden, politically, it's a very smart move for him to do. We'll see if it's successful or not, but this is the obvious move for him to make.
Faiz, is this going to energize Democrats? They want to see more of this. I mean, he doesn't take on Trump very frequently. Right. I don't know if he's going to mention the former president by name, but I think it's going to be pretty clear who he's talking
about. Joe Biden,
about.
by nature, is a peaceable person. He's a peacemaker. He doesn't like a lot of friction in his life. He doesn't really take on too many Republicans. He doesn't take on people in his own party. He doesn't take on corporations. So in Trump, as Doug's saying, you got a perfect foil. It's a gift for him that finally he needs friction. If you're fighting a political fight, you need a choice, A versus B. And Trump comes along and gives him an A versus B choice to help generate enthusiasm, find a message about the economy, and have someone to pick on.
Leigh, what's interesting about this is that we didn't really know what to expect from the January 6th committee hearings. They've wrapped up their hearings for the summer, but they say stay tuned for September. What is your sense of how they are playing and whether they are really starting to chip away at some of Trump's support around the edges for independents, for example, and for some GOP voters?
I think we're still going to have to wait to see. The elections, though, are just 3 months away, and that's not very far. And especially if they have more hearings in September, very close to the elections. And it's not going to change the base's mind on either side, but it could with those independent, those moderate voters. It could again be a reminder that Trump is still very much a factor. Both President Biden talking today about Trump and about law enforcement, he's really hitting two birds with one stone because of the Trump issue and also law enforcement. This is an issue that Democrats have struggled on for some time, including the defund the police issue. And looking back to Congress later this week, the House Democrats are going to put forward a series of bills that will fund the police, a lot of public safety bills, and these are definitely to send the message that Democrats do not, in fact, want to defund the police.
And Doug, you and I have had a number of conversations about this, that if Democrats and Republicans are talking about Trump, they're not talking about the issue that Republicans want to be talking about, which is the economy. And we're going to sort of see these two different strategies on display, I think, in yet another proxy war moment with Trump and Pence here in D.C., here in the nation's capital, the first time the former president's returning since the inauguration of Joe Biden. How big is this moment?
So I actually think the bigger moment was last week that Mike Pence addressed the Republican Study Committee, which is a group of conservative Republican members of Congress that the Freedom Caucus was an offshoot of. That Republican members of Congress came and embraced Mike Pence in a way that they hadn't before. To me, is something that wouldn't have happened 6 months ago, even 3 months ago. These hearings have allowed Republicans to inch away slowly, privately, but slowly inch away from Donald Trump, and that they welcomed him in, to me, is more significant than competing speeches or competing endorsements. That's what candidates or potential candidates do. The reaction from the membership, to me, is much more interesting.
I think it's a very good point. In fact, Vaughn Hilliard has a little bit more on this proxy war. I want to play it and then get everyone's reaction on the other side. Take a look.
Kristen, these next 3 weeks are so politically important to Donald Trump. Of course, the January 6th Select Committee is going to continue their work. The DOJ is going to continue their investigation. But when you look at Donald Trump's political future, these next 3 weeks are going to tell us a lot. You've got the primaries in Arizona, in Michigan, Wisconsin, Missouri, but of course then in mid-August, you've got the Liz Cheney primary. But the one that I think will be most telling is Arizona. On August 2nd, you have these two political newcomers, Karen Taylor Robeson and Carrie Lake. And this is where for the first time you saw Donald Trump and Mike Pence on Friday head-to-head on the campaign trail. This is a Republican Party that is still very much Donald Trump's Republican Party. But is this an opening in which Mike Pence will try to take a shovel and begin to dig into the potential crack that exists within the GOP today? And that is why seeing him on the campaign trail, along with the likes of Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, standing beside Karen Taylor Robeson and encouraging Republican voters to look ahead instead of backwards, is so telling here, because it sets up a potential dynamic. If the Pence-backed candidate is able to pull this off, perhaps give him confidence to wade further into other races down the road, and of course, even potentially that Wyoming one where Liz Cheney is trying to hold on to her congressional seat. There's a lot at play these next 3 weeks. Kristen?
There certainly is. Vaughn broke it down so well. Leigh, and I love how Vaughn put it, the potential crack in support for Trump that Pence is really trying to get in on with these events and by, frankly, these endorsements that he's making. How much, and Doug kind of laid out the case, but how much headway do you think he's making? Is it realistic at all? Because some people say that his candidacy would be DOA.
Yeah, a lot of people say that, and a lot of people still believe that. But the fact that Mike Pence is taking this stage and inserting himself, something that was a huge question months ago, if Mike Pence was going to embrace this role within the Republican Party, and he's decided to do it. And it wasn't just some of the Republicans at the RSC last week who embraced him. The night before, he had dinner with Kevin McCarthy at a fundraiser for the NRCC. So you have members of the Republican Party who are trying to embrace both sides of it, not knowing how this is going to play out over the next 2.5 years.
You see what's going on, and I'm sure, Doug, you agree with it, that like Trump is trying to be a loyal Republican soldier. A lot of Republicans like to talk about the economy. They would not like to talk about the big lie. Trump is going to inject himself. What's the big topic going to be? Hey, the election was stolen from me. Hey, Wisconsin. Hey, Georgia. Get your act together. Give me back the election. And so the more that Trump speaks, I think they're going to have a challenge about what does Mike Pence say in response? What does Ron DeSantis say in response? And he's always they're all chasing Donald Trump, who knows how to create, with his lunacy and his narcissism, the news.
Doug. Yeah, and there are two conversations happening simultaneously, 2022 and 2024. And obviously for Trump, it's all about 2024. Potentially, we'll see what he does. But he gets in the way of 2022. And one of the things we may see is if all of these super Trumpy, right, they're all a little Trumpy, but if the super Trumpy candidates, Dan Cox being a good example, Doug Mastriano, if they lose, there's going to be blame laid at Donald Trump's feet. And that's really important for the party if they're going to move forward. If they win, there's going to be blame laid all over the place, including at Democrats.
Yeah, I think that's such a significant point. I mean, Faiz, do Democrats run the risk of underestimating some of these candidates? You think about a Doug Mastriano, who, a couple of months ago, a lot of people didn't think had a real chance at winning. And now he's coming up in the polls.
Kristen, the issue is turnout. It's just, it's a fundamental turnout question. If you look at the Democratic base, if people showed up, we'd be fine. However, you see the collapse of young people within the Democratic Party. You even see some moderates moving in a different direction, independents. So I think if you had the regular turnout, even of a midterm in 2018 when Trump was obviously president, that was a very high turnout. Democrats would be fine. Yeah. However, you look at even the primaries thus far, there's been low turnout across the board, and that should be concerning to all Democrats.
Let me ask you guys about the economy, because you had these fascinating comments from Janet Yellen with Chuck on Sunday, basically saying, look, even if we see 2 straight quarters of contraction, it's not a recession, because economists, real economists, take in a range of different factors, including and especially the labor market. But Leanne, how challenging is that argument to make, especially when you have Americans, bottom line, going to the grocery store, who are paying more every month for basic things?
Yeah, and it's not just the Americans who are going to the grocery store and paying more. People's stock market portfolios are also way down, and that there's a story in the Wall Street Journal today that it's not just impacting lower middle income Americans, but it's impacting upper middle class Americans too. A lot of people are starting to feel this, and so this is absolutely a huge issue for Democrats. It's bad messaging to say if there is a recession, but it's also bad messaging if you are debating on if we are in a recession or not.
We're just getting very quickly some news. The president's remarks are just out. Let me read them, and then we can go back to the economy. Let me read a little bit about what he says. President Biden says, for 3 hours, the defeated former president, United States, watched it all happen, meaning January 6th, as he sat in the comfort of the private dining room next to the Oval Office while he was doing that brave law enforcement officers are subjected to the medieval hell for 3 hours. Now, this is a rough log. So he also says the police were heroes that day. Donald Trump lacked the courage to act. The brave women and men in blue all across this nation should never forget that. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-cop. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-democracy. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-America. Faiz, how compelling are those?
It's facts from the January 6th commission. And so now what does Trump say in response? He's dragged Trump into a Biden versus Trump debate about, are you for the cops? Well, how are you for the cops? Why did you let your people just storm the Capitol without saying anything, without even coming out in defense of the brave men and women who were trying to defend that Capitol? Go ahead. Your turn, Donald Trump.
When this conversation started, we knew that he was going to say something. But, Doug, now we have the substance of what he is saying. He's going after Trump directly. We looked at our files. The last time he talked specifically about January 6th was on the anniversary of this year. This is significant that he's talking about January 6th and Trump again.
It is. And everything you laid out that Joe Biden said is objective fact. But it's not where voters are. It's not what their focus is on. Even if the ratings have been good, and Donald Trump cares about ratings, obviously, have been strong for these hearings. Voters are waking up every day. They're paying more for everything. And so this is the challenge of the Biden administration. They want to change the conversation. And they still want to talk about the economy. So if they're saying gas prices are down 50 cents over the last 6-8 weeks, okay, that's sort of good news, but they're still $1.30 higher than they were than Biden came in. And that is a very difficult place to message.
It's a smart point, Leanne.
But Biden could also be anticipating a potential Trump announcement before the midterms. And so the more he starts talking about Trump now, he's actually setting Trump up for entering the race.
Yeah, and I think that the question is, how do you walk that fine line? Because, Faiz, as Doug is saying, Democrats' strongest point may be the economy. You have former Vice President Mike Pence saying, if we're talking about the past, we're losing.
Yeah. Well, they need an economic message going into this midterm. The Democrats
and you
do.
Still don't think they have one?
No, it's clear they don't. I mean, and you look at the approval ratings of Biden on the economy; they are really difficult right now. And so I look at the working class agenda issues that were before Congress. It's shrunk because of Joe Manchin, right? The reconciliation package has moved this way. Why wouldn't it be going this way? Why wouldn't you be talking about windfall profits tax? Why wouldn't you be talking about another stimulus if you were a Democrat? I don't quite understand it. Why wouldn't you be saying, hey, working class people need our help. Let's get out there and provide something.
We have the bite. I'm going to play it, and then we'll get more reaction. Here's the bite from the president.
Police were heroes that day. Donald Trump lacked the courage to act. The brave women and men in blue all across this nation should never forget that. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-cop. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-democracy. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-American.
Guys, we're basically out of time, but just one line each reaction.
I mean, Biden is trying to set the comparison between him and Trump.
Not just set the comparison, but bait him into it. The best thing that can happen for Democrats is a Donald Trump announcement.
Nothing drags more passion out of the president than Trump, and you kind of see it there. That's a good thing for Joe Biden.
You guys were an awesome panel. Thank you for rolling with all the punches, Leanne, Faiz, and Doug. Really appreciate it. Great conversation. Coming up next, the World Health Organization declares monkeypox a global health emergency, what it means for public health, and what it could mean for you amid an ongoing pandemic. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As the president continues his COVID isolation, Senators Joe Manchin and Lisa Murkowski have now both announced that they have COVID. That makes 3 senators currently absent from Congress with COVID, as the highly transmissible BA.5 variant now accounts for nearly 80% of all cases in the country. Meanwhile, we're, of course, tracking monkeypox, which is continuing its rapid spread across both the U.S. and the world, leading the World Health Organization over the weekend to declare a global emergency for the second time in the last 3 years. NBC's Blaine Alexander has the very latest.
With cases rapidly on the rise, the World Health Organization is sounding the alarm on monkeypox, declaring the virus a global health emergency.
we have an outbreak that has spread around the world rapidly through new modes of transmission, about which we understand too little.
The last time the World Health Organization made this designation was January of 2020 in response to COVID-19. Rarely lethal, but deeply painful, monkeypox is spread through close, direct contact, causing lesions and sores.
This is occurring in a population of principally men who have sex with men and bisexual men.
But now the CDC has confirmed 2 new cases in children, one in California, a second in Washington, D.C. Experts say a rare but concerning development.
This virus is now getting into family circumstances. It can spread to women and in close family contacts where there is a lot of hugging and kissing.
Across the country, the numbers are steadily rising. Less than 2 weeks ago, the CDC listed just over 1,400 confirmed cases nationwide. Now, that number has nearly doubled, with cases in all but 5 states. Jeffrey Galais is one of them.
My pain level is excruciating.
He is now part of a clinical trial, taking an antiviral medication for the pain. He says getting treatment has been nearly impossible.
If we don't get ahead of it now, it's going to be too late.
So far, vaccines have been in low supply, with people waiting in long lines hoping to get the shot, something the Biden administration is promising to address.
We're going to be releasing hundreds of thousands of more vaccines in the next days and weeks.
Blaine, thank you for that report. Joining me now is Dr. Amesh Adalja, senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and an infectious disease physician. Dr. Adalja, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. You see those long lines for vaccines, and I think a lot of people are wondering why. Monkeypox is not a new virus. Why has there not been a more robust rollout when it comes to vaccines?
It's just that there's not enough of the Jynneos second-generation smallpox vaccine. You have to remember that that vaccine was procured as an alternative smallpox vaccine. So it wasn't something that was intended to be used during a large monkeypox outbreak. So there wasn't that much of it around. We have lots of the first-generation smallpox vaccine, but it's too reactogenic to really use widely on a monkeypox outbreak, which is not as lethal as smallpox. So it's just literally not enough doses. And we're starting to get more, but it's going to be some time before we're able to catch up with the actual need for this vaccine.
Yeah, the administration is vowing to roll out, as you just heard Dr. Jha say, more doses. But it doesn't seem like it's getting to those who need it fast enough. Should the medical community be prioritizing first doses as a way to at least start to distribute the vaccine to try to contain the outbreak?
That's the position I have, that first doses should be prioritized, that we shouldn't be holding back second doses. We should get as many people vaccinated that are in that high-risk category with their first dose, and then we can catch up with that second dose. Because what we want is immunity now to stop the spread of this infection.
And I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that there aren't more treatments readily available. And I heard a doctor earlier today say that at this point in time, the antivirals are really reserved for the people who are suffering most. How can that be in the United States? Why aren't we better equipped to deal with this?
We have a lot of antiviral available. The bottleneck is actually the over 100 pages of paperwork that individuals who want to prescribe it have to fill out. That's a surefire way to get people not to prescribe it. I think what we want to understand is who benefits from this antiviral. Clearly, those in severe pain, those that get hospitalized too. But I think we could start thinking about using it more broadly to see if it gets people better. But there's so much bureaucratic paperwork in the way. They're starting to lessen it, but it's still too much if you want to use this drug. Many doctors don't have the time to fill out 120 pages of forms. It's just not conducive to a response to an emergency.
Dr. Adalja, I think there's still a lot of confusion about how this is spread. So can you be specific? How do you get monkeypox? Does there need to be prolonged contact with someone who's infected?
Monkeypox is something that usually requires close skin-to-skin contact over a period of time. So that could be hugging, kissing, sexual encounters. All of that is how monkeypox spreads. Traditionally, it was, handling an infected animal, or households that had one person infected, other people touched it. So it's not something that is casually transmitted. It's not transmitted like a respiratory virus. It's not a very contagious virus. And I think that underscores the fact that we should be able to handle this, especially after COVID-19, when all of our public health agencies sort of ramped up.
Yeah, according to public health officials, so far in this country, it has primarily impacted the community, men who have sex with other men. How important is it not to engage in stigmas around this disease as we try to learn more about it and fight it, particularly given that it can impact anyone?
Well, I think there's a false alternative being set up. It's clearly true that this is predominantly affecting men who have sex with men. And yes, there's going to be other individuals who can get infected. And what we need to do is actually bring our medical countermeasures to bear in that population where they're such a need for them. So I think it's not stigmatizing to recognize what's happening in the unique form of this outbreak. And I think we have to get rid of these kind of irrational ideas that stigmatize people for getting an infection. We saw how badly that went with HIV. But at the same time, I think we can't ignore the fact that this is disproportionately impacting that population, and they need resources to stop it.
Such important information. Dr. Adalja, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
After a break, a historic apology. Pope Francis addresses, quote, deplorable abuses committed against Indigenous people in some Canadian Catholic schools. You're watching Meet the Press now. That's after a quick break. Welcome back. An emotional and historic day in Canada as Pope Francis apologized to First Nations leaders and survivors of Canadian residential Catholic schools. The Pope asked for forgiveness, saying he was, quote, deeply sorry for the generations of abuse and cultural suppression that occurred at the schools. The Pope spoke at one of the schools where Indigenous children were taken from their families and forcibly assimilated. More than 150,000 children attended those schools where sexual abuse was rampant and thousands died from mistreatment and disease. At today's event, a red banner with the names of children who died was displayed, but many victims remain unidentified. Last year, the discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves at school sites across Canada drew renewed international attention to this terrible chapter in the history of the Church. Before his apology, the Pope prayed at a local cemetery that holds marked and unmarked graves of victims of that residential school. NBC's Claudio Lavagna was at the event today, and he joins me from Canada. Claudio, thank you so much for joining us. I know that this was an emotional day, and it was historic. Talk about what it was like to be there, what the apology meant.
Hey, Kristen. Well, it meant a lot, especially to the Indigenous communities here, because that apology was made in front of the leaders of the three biggest Indigenous communities in Canada, as well as many survivors. And the Pope said, begged for forgiveness several times. He said sorry several times. And each time he was doing that, it will be interrupted by a long applause. He already said sorry about those crimes that were committed in those residential schools in the past, run by the Catholic Church, when these leaders of the Indigenous communities went to see him at the Vatican. But it just assumes a whole different dimension, that he has traveled all the way to Edmonton, to Canada, and then he's going to travel to other places to say sorry on their soil, on the place where these crimes took place. And that's why this is very, very significant. There's another thing that was very significant in that speech, and it was the fact that he acknowledged the fact that saying sorry is just the first step. It's just not enough. And he said that apart from doing that, he also wants to have in the church a culture that will foresee a respect for Indigenous people, not only in Canada but also abroad. And also he announced the start of a serious investigation, as he called it, into those facts in the past, Kristen.
And I'm so glad you raised that point, that he is making it clear it is only a first step, but still a significant and historic one. Claudio, thank you so much for all of your great reporting. Great to see you. We really appreciate it. And we'll be right back. Welcome back. Ukraine is moving forward with plans to resume exporting grain, even after a Russian attack On the port city of Odessa, the missile strike on Saturday came a day after an agreement was reached that allows Ukraine to export millions of tons of grain. More than 20 million tons of grain have been struck in Ukraine's Black Sea ports since the war there began, contributing to a global food shortage. Meanwhile, Russia's top diplomat Sergei Lavrov is blaming the West for the global food shortage. Lavrov made the comments during a trip to Africa, a continent that has borne the brunt of that food shortage. He also stated in no uncertain terms that Russia's goal from this war is to oust President Zelensky and what he calls Ukraine's unacceptable regime. Joining me now to discuss this further, Bill Taylor, who served as U.S. ambassador to Ukraine during George W. Bush's administration. He's now vice president of Russia and Europe at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Thank you, Ambassador, for joining me. Really appreciate it. Let's start right there. Your reaction to Sergei Lavrov, his admission that Moscow wants to oust President Zelensky. What does that mean? What are the implications?
Kristen, that means that what we've suspected all along, President Putin wants to totally dominate, totally absorb, indeed wipe Ukraine off the map as a nation. This is what he has said. This is what President Putin has said. And now Minister Lavrov has reinforced that. It's so interesting, Kristen, that this is different, of course, from what Minister Lavrov said several months ago. He said, no, we're not intending to have regime change. No, now it is regime change. That's clearly what he's after. This is what they've been doing. This is what they're doing with their military, and this is what they're trying to do politically.
What does this mean in terms of how this ends? Because there had been some hope that perhaps there could be some talks to end this conflict. And now, when Ukraine hears that, you have to think that they're less inclined to actually engage in any type of diplomacy at this point.
Well, you're exactly right. This just reinforces that skepticism on the part of the Ukrainians. As you pointed out, just 2 days ago, they come to an agreement with the United Nations and with Turkey, and a parallel agreement that the Russians had signed with the United Nations and Turkey to allow the grain to go out, to allow the grain to go to Egypt, to go to Africa, to go to these places where they need this grain. They need the Ukrainian grain that has been blocked by the Russians. And so to go against that right away, the implications are you cannot deal with the Russians. There's probably going to have to be a strong military push on the part of the Ukrainians to get to the eventual negotiations that will come when the Russians realize that they're losing.
And the backdrop to all of this is yet another announcement with Russia saying that it plans to reduce its natural gas flow to Germany. What do you make of that announcement as a sign that Russia is actually getting desperate? Or are they trying to pressure Western nations?
Or both. They are clearly getting desperate. Their measure of their desperation is they're running out of weapons. They're having to go to the Iranians, Kristen, to get weapons. And they are putting pressure, trying to put pressure on the Europeans by cutting the gas flows. They know that winter comes, and at that time, the gas is going to be very needy, very precious, very important for all these Europeans and indeed around the world. So they're trying to exert that pressure right now. The Ukrainians know that, and that's why they're mounting this counteroffensive.
The White House and obviously its partners and allies around the world have imposed a number of rounds of sanctions against Russia. We know that it is having an impact on the Russian economy, but it doesn't seem to be impacting Vladimir Putin.
You're right, because Vladimir Putin doesn't appear to care about the effects on the Russian people. He doesn't appear to care about the number of Russian soldiers who have died. The estimates are 15,000. Some estimates from the Ukrainian side go up to 38,000 Russian soldiers that have been killed in these 5 months of fighting. But President Putin doesn't seem to be bothered by this. So it is going to take pressure from the Ukrainian military on the Russian military in order to end this fighting.
And you still have President Zelensky, the First Lady of Ukraine, who sat down with my colleague Peter Alexander last week saying that they still want more from the U.S. even though the U.S., other countries have given several rounds of military, humanitarian aid, economic aid. Why isn't help getting to the front lines fast enough, Ambassador?
Kristen, it is getting to the front line, but you're right, not fast enough. They have seen the benefits. They've seen the effectiveness of these long-range weapons and these very accurate weapons that is able to put a real crimp in the Russians' ability to fight them. So they know the value of these things, and they just need more of them. They need them more quickly. Of course, there are constraints on just the logistics of getting these weapons to the front line. But that's coming, and the United States is pushing real hard. Other nations, other NATO nations are doing the same.
All right. Well, you always make us smarter on this issue as we continue to track this war. Ambassador Bill Taylor, thank you so much. And thank you for being with us this hour. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with my friend Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.